my pleasure to introduce the host of this evening, R. Alan Brooks, who is many things, including an artist in the Cowboy exhibition himself. He teaches graphic novel writing for Regis University's MFA program and also Lighthouse Writers Workshop. He's the author of The Burning Metronome and Anguish Garden, which are graphic novels featuring social commentary, and his award-winning weekly comic for the Colorado Sun, What I Miss, has been praised for its direct engagement with social issues. He has a TED Talk, and if you haven't seen it, you should, because a million other people have already seen it and engaged with that. And he also hosts MCA Denver's podcast, How Art is Born. His graphic novel, Deerfield, is on view in the Cowboy exhibition. Please give a warm welcome to R. Alan Brooks.
Hello. Let's try it again. Hello. So listen, there's a tight group of us, right? So that means that we're all working to make a cool event together. So the important thing is that we know that we create this experience together, right? So it's up to me to kind of like guide through things, build the hype up, make you guys feel connected. We're gonna have, like Sarah mentioned, we're gonna have the movie, we're gonna have a discussion, and then there'll be time for questions from you guys. I'll say this a few times, but when we come to the question time, I encourage you to think of what your question is, distill it down to one sentence, and then ask the question. That's the key. Anyway, and the key thing too is that we have some energy. We make everybody feel good, right? So I asked Yumi and Emmanuel for something from the Filipino culture that is an exclamation to get people to applaud. So we're going to do a practice, and anyone who knows whether I'm pronouncing it right or wrong, please don't judge me. But the word is palapakan, right? And that's a chance for you guys to applaud. So we're going to do a practice where I'm going to say it, and we're going to applaud. Are you with me? Yes? Are you with me? Yeah, all right. Palapakan! Yeah! Right on. So you get like 2 or 3 times to do this tonight. I just want you to know what to expect. So I'm going to say, I'm going to give this introduction for our guest tonight, and then I'm going to say that word, and we're going to applaud, and they're going to come up. Are you guys with me for that plan? Yes? Right on. All right, so our guests tonight are Yumi Janairo Roth and Emmanuel David, both professors at CU Boulder. Yumi teaches sculpture and post-studio practice. Emmanuel is a gender studies scholar who studies the Philippines and its diaspora. Palapakan!
All right. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for being out here tonight. We're so excited that you're part of this program. We're going to be watching this film by Shireen Sino. She's a Filipina, born to a Filipina family in Japan, and her practice or her films look at history and memory and culture. And this film is super interesting because it takes on, the Trans-Pacific West. And so it's called Shotgun Tuding, and it's about 15 minutes, a 15-minute short. And want to add to that?
And it's, so it was mentioned already that it's a pancit Western, which is essentially a take on the spaghetti Western. So even though it's from, I think it's from 2014, the film was shot in 16 millimeter, so it has certainly that patina of a pancit Western, of a spaghetti Western. So should we just roll it?
Let's roll the film, so thanks.
I feel like one thing that I learned was if I need to escape a group of tough guys, get them in an argument about the size of their guns.
That's right.
Call too deep.
That's the easy way to escape, right? Did you guys?
I think we'll stand, yeah.
All right. Well then, palapakan!
So, ang galing naman, di ba?
Do it stand
I think, yeah.
Okay.
So,
Can we maybe, I was going to say, maybe bring the blue lights
there
down?
that goes. Looks good. All right, so it's not every night that we get to see a Filipino film in Denver, let alone a pancit Western. So I know that Shireen Sino, we've been in touch with her, and she was excited that we were showing the film here tonight. So I think this is being filmed, and maybe we can offer Shireen a round of applause too for that film. Palakpakan! Yeah. And kalimutan ko, but I forgot to offer thanks to those who are organizing this. So Sarah Bai for putting the evening together, R. Ellen Brooks for emceeing, and Miranda Lash for co-curating this amazing cowboy show at MCA Denver, along with Nora Abrams. So thank you so much. Round of applause.
Can we bring maybe the blue light down just a little bit, this front light? I don't know, just so the images are. But I think what we were going to do is maybe just provide a little bit of a transition, like why are we showing this film, and then sort of talking about our work. And one of the things I think that was interesting for us about this is that especially in the US, I think sort of the awareness of this idea of a cowboy culture or anything like that in the Philippines might seem unusual. And that has a lot to do with our own project, which is finding the Filipinos in Buffalo Bill's Wild West. And I think another parallel that we found also is there's a female protagonist in her film, and we'll talk a little bit about the female protagonist that is part of the Wild West show from the turn of the 20th century.
So we will turn to the artwork, which is titled We Are Coming. So this is on view right now at MCA Denver. It's an installation work that is playing with the idea of a marquee. So right here you see these kind of marquee letters that are spread out kind of in the center of the museum, and they make this kind of announcement. And it asks a lot of questions like, who is the we? Who is coming, where are they coming from? Right. And for Yumi and I, who've been working on this project together since 2021,
I think.
Yeah, we've been trying to conceptualize and imagine the lives and this untold story of a group of Rough Riders, as they came to be known, who participated in Buffalo Bill's Wild West.
Do you want to click to the next? So We Are Coming, actually, when we were thinking about this project, when we were first starting to do this research, and it really started off as a sort of a research into the archives about like trying to find these Filipinos in Buffalo Bill's Wild West, we came across a lot of ephemera. And one of the most famous pieces of ephemera is this poster of Buffalo Bill, and he was so famous at the time, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, that posters of his face with this stampeding herd of buffalo and the words, "I am coming," was sufficient to announce that Buffalo Bill's Wild West was coming to your town. So we were interested in that sort of play between the text of "I am coming" and the singular kind of messianic I, and the sort of the singular white guy, and this group of brown Asians who were gonna be part of the show. So next slide. So part of it is what we realized also, like we're like super deep into Buffalo Bill's Wild West, which, go back.
There we go. No, one more.
Yes. Nope.
There. Okay,
Nope.
go.
Oh, no, you can go to the next one.
There.
So, and we realize that we actually have come to know a lot about Buffalo Bill's Wild West, but not everybody does, so we'll give you a little bit of a background. So Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was the biggest thing happening in the late sort of 19th century, beginning 20th century in terms of traveling exhibitions. This is an image from, I think, 1907, but this is what it would have looked like. And so this show would have traveled 11,000 miles in one season. They employed about 500 to 600 individuals, both like sort of front of house, back of house, there's 500 performers, right? 500 performers, 600 animals.
500 horses?
Yeah, so, because they also had a small herd of bison. And then each of these exhibitions or each of these performances, there would be 10 to 15,000 people who would come, and they would do these performances twice a day. And sometimes they would just visit a town for one day, they would do 2 shows, or like in New York City, they would do it for 2 weeks, and they would have 2 shows a day, they would be sold out and everything. So this was the big game in town. So this is just an image, and there you can see Buffalo Bill Cody in the front.
And one of the amazing things about this show is, in many ways, linking to the theme of the exhibition, which is it staged these cowboy Indian conflicts, and which were always resolved with kind of the white settlers winning, winning these mock battles. And so this kind of this idea of manifest destiny, westward expansion, was kind of a key element of the show. And even though it was about the Wild West, it was framed largely for audiences in the East or in the Midwest or the American South. And so what it was doing was kind of constructing an idea of the nation at a particular moment in history where it was kind of justifying the race relations at the time. So something that's interesting about our project, I think, is that we were curious about how and why this group of Filipinos entered into the picture, and what we found was that there was this expansion of the West across the Pacific, and it was part of kind of the historical relations with U.S. imperialism, U.S. empire in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And do you want to?
So the presence of Filipinos in the Wild West show coincides with a war that lots of people haven't heard about, but is also an incredibly important war in U.S. and Philippine history, and it's the Philippine-American War, which was from 1899 to 1902 officially, and then there was actually a pretty bloody guerrilla war that continued on for almost another decade. And it's really on the heels of that moment, this thing that was front page news, that Buffalo Bill, the show, decides that it's going to hire Filipinos as well as other sort of territories that the United States has started to take over.
Yeah, and we'll rewind. Before the Philippine-American War, it was also the end of the Spanish-American War, which is where the U.S. annexed the Philippines. So it was at that moment, that 1898,
Yes.
going into 1899, that this show recruited the Filipinos to become the kind of living evidence or ethnological display of, they called it, our strange new people from these foreign lands.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment.
So the thing is with these archives of the American West is, so what we're finding now is we're like, oh look, there are images of Filipinos, here are photographs of Filipinos, but these are not evident in the archives, and so this is what the last several years for Emmanuel and I have really been. It was about trying to identify where these individuals and the representations of these individuals exist in that archive. And so this is one of the early posters that we encountered, and it's, it kind of gives you what I always love. We don't have a comparison here, but it looks like the Magnificent Sevens movie poster, also very close. If you Google that, you'll see it's very close. But this gives you a sense of this kind of global reach that the Wild West show really tried to have. And so you have this kind of, Rough Riders of the world. So it's not just cowboys of the United States, but it's equestrians across the globe. And that circle is not in the original poster, but through a lot of cross sort of analysis of different images that we ended up finding, we learned that that's actually a representation of one of the Filipino, how Filipinos were imagined in Buffalo Bill's Wild West. So there he is. He's next to a Cuban soldier, and there's actually a Hawaiian in there as well too, just to kind of give you a sense. And then there are other folks in there.
So the project emerged with us stumbling across just these fragments in the archive. So the last slide that was just up was pretty far along in our research. But when we first started looking into this, we knew almost nothing. And what we first discovered was a couple names that were listed in the program, as well as this photograph, which is housed in the collection of the Denver Public Library. So the Denver Public Library has one of the most extensive collections on Buffalo Bill because his business manager, Nate Salisbury, had these kind of amazing scrapbooks that he constructed at each season, put the newspaper articles in there, but also had scrapbooks with photographs. And this image was one of our first starting points.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it is, if you look at this image, so obviously it's the image of the person in the foreground who's the focus, and this is a Filipino performer. This one was actually labeled Filipino, and it looks very different from the poster. So it's a different costume. You can see there's the hat that's called a salakot that he's wearing, and he's wearing this sort of white canvas shirt and pants. But we can't see his face, which was an interesting thing. So he's quite present, but we can't actually identify him, and we've tried really hard.
Yeah. And so the project, we kept working on it, it was about like all these like traces or fragments, and it was really a puzzle or a mystery. But as we've continued to work on it over the years, people are starting to take shape. We're starting to learn more about them as individuals, as people, not just names on the program. And well, here are the names on the program.
Here are the names on the program. So
Yeah,
in 1899, this was the actual, when the Filipinos first appeared, and this is one of the first encounters we actually had with them. And so you can see them, they're in the top right of this route book. So this would have been a souvenir book that you could have gotten at the Wild West show. We have the 1900 version actually at MCA. And you can see there are 3 names. And it's important to kind of look at the names because the names actually change throughout time, which is kind of a hallmark of being an immigrant. Your name gets altered or you alter your name over time. So it's Felix Alcantara, Isidora Alcantara, and Geronimo Momo are the first 3.
Yeah, and so if you have a chance to go to the MCA, this artifact is amazing. It's about the size of
your phone.
My phone right here is like, this, on screen on this scale, it's like amazing because it's like gigantic, but there it's this tiny little thing that fits in your pocket. And so we were interested when we showed our work at MCA to take this tiny thing that might be like 6-point font or like,
yeah,
I don't know, just tiny text and like blow it up, the scale, so like it feels big, right? And so our project is putting their names up on these marquees.
Oh, but before we get that.
Before that, we're also interested in that question of we are coming, who is the we, where are they coming from? Mm-hmm. And like these scraps in the archives are coming together. This is actually the ship manifest of their arrival on mainland U.S. soil. We found the date, March 18th, 1899. They departed Hawaii on March 10th. The circle on your left has their names listed. We figured out that Buffalo Bill paid their fare. And so it's one of these earliest moments, I think, of Filipino immigrants coming to mainland U.S.
As performers.
As performers, right. And under U.S. rules. So the Treaty of Paris was ratified in February. So what is it, like a month after the ratification of the Treaty of Paris, where the U.S. acquires the Philippines for $20 million, they are among the first wave of Filipino performers to arrive.
Right.
And so it's a complex history, and it might seem like, hey, this is just a handful of people, but their story is telling us a lot, or it's like setting the stage to have us rethink kind of early Filipino immigration.
Right. So. And it's really tracking the names. So this is why the names become really important for us. This is how we're following people through, is how they appear in print or in these kinds of records.
Yeah. It's the method of following.
Yeah.
That's our archival method. So we'll keep going.
So in that logic of the names, we were wondering. So the reason for the marquee, why the marquee, why foreground the names on a movie marquee versus images of Filipinos riding horses, and I think it was really. One, thinking about that the name was the primary thing that we encountered, and 2, thinking about the marquee as like the place where the movie star goes, right? That's where like the main act, that's how you announce the main act coming. And the marquee itself it signals a kind of movement through time and space. If it's at this theater, it's going to go to another theater and then another theater. So we basically took that logic of we are coming, sort of converting I am coming into we are coming as kind of its own type of show. And then we started putting up the names of the first 3, the original 3 1899 Filipino performers as the star acts. But this is a show that is perpetually always coming or can never come because everybody is dead. Nothing actually is happening in that theater, but there's all this anticipation. And so this is in Boulder Theater. They have a beautiful marquee there. So it was our first sort of outing with it, but then we've since done it in a few other places, and we'll get to those images.
And movie theaters are also political spaces. We've thought about who has access to leisure spaces. What does it mean to, be able to rest and enjoy something? And so we've also tracked some of the history of the racial politics of movie theaters, and some theaters would have special times for non-white audiences. Usually they're later in the evening, or it's not the prime time show. So we were also thinking about what it means to be able to enter a space, or be the headliners
of that
in a
space,
show. Yeah. So that was in the Boulder Theater. This is a daytime shot, but we also have a beautiful nighttime image that's on the second floor of MCA. So if you'd like to check out that going forward.
So I mentioned that the show traveled anywhere from 11 to 12,000 miles in one season in 200 days, was 200 something days. And so in that route book, for example, it would have included a map of the US and basically the crisscross of where they would have traveled. So this is the 1899 map, and this is the region of the United States that the show went to.
Anything else we want to say about this? I'm just studying it because I haven't seen it this big, and I'm wow, it's amazing. So, and so it always started, or at least the years that they started, they were in the show for 2 years, 1899 and 1900. It always started with the season opener at Madison Square Garden. The elites of the period would show up. The military officials would be there. Remington Drew was in the audience.
Frederick Remington,
drawing. So this was it was not just a minor event. This was the political and entertainment event of the moment. In their opening performance, should we talk about that, or is it?
Well, I think we have an image of the opening performance. There it is.
Go.
Go.
So this is an image of the Filipino troupe. Their circle. Well, it's an image of an all-cast group photo, and we found
in Madison Square Garden.
We found this image at the Buffalo Bill Museum and Grave Archives, which is in Golden, Colorado. That is a museum that is run by Denver Parks and Rec. It has a tie to Colorado because Buffalo Bill Cody passed away here, 1917.
1917.
Yeah. He passed away. What month? I can't remember.
January?
But he couldn't be buried, so they held his body at Olinger's mortuary, which is now Linger.
Lola and Linger. Lola and Linger? It's a restaurant.
Yeah, restaurant. But anyway, Buffalo Bill has a nice long history with Denver. But this is we found this image in the archives in Golden, and we it's not this big, but we were in there searching for this group, and we identified them based on their clothing and their
hats.
And their hats.
For the men. And this is the first image that you actually see Isadora. And what's really interesting about this image is Isadora almost hits true center of that group, which is kind of an amazing place to be just compositionally in this photograph, I think.
Yeah, and I guess we haven't said that. There are 8 total.
By 1900.
By 1900, 8 total Filipino Rough Riders, and Isadora is kind of the female character, and so we are interested too in kind of centering her story. So in the Boulder image, we made a decision to put her name front and center. The others were kind of on the side. It was kind of a feminist decision to kind of center her story, because actually we know almost the least about her. So.
Yes.
Okay, what else?
So anyhow, this is Madison Square Garden. We have another image of it, so maybe we can flip. So this is actually the first image that we encountered when we were able to actually look through the archive. And this is an important thing to know about archives. They aren't always actually labeled correctly, right? The information that is tagged on them doesn't always coincide with actually what's going on. And so originally, this photograph was cast as, I think they were the Sinhalese ? Performers. So there was no way to know that they were Filipino performers unless you had started to have some familiarity with the costuming, either through some of the line drawings that we encountered, through some newspaper research, or that other photograph that we saw at DPL. But this is a remarkable photograph. This is all 8 performers, and again, Isadora in the center, and that painted backdrop. One thing that's interesting about that painted backdrop is here, like the show was really trying to transport its viewers to the West. And we learned working with an archivist at Cody, Wyoming, that backdrop is actually a representation of Cody, Wyoming. So it had been sort of named a few different things or had been unnamed, but we find through certain things like the steam coming out of the hot springs and the way there's a crevice between those mountains really pinpointed it to Cody, Wyoming, which then, click, right?
There we go.
Is one of the reasons why when we were doing archival research at the Buffalo Bill Center for the West, we were interested in also realizing the marquee project on the Cody Theater in Cody, Wyoming, which is named after Buffalo Bill Cody because he helped to establish the town. And so in the backdrop are those mountains. So the Filipino performers never actually traveled to Cody, like in body, but sort of I guess like in the imaginary world, they certainly did. So this becomes an interesting connection.
And to say one more thing about like digging through the archives, if you put in like a keyword search, it's only as good as kind of the tags or the descriptions. And if we had put in Filipino into that database, nothing, very little would have shown up. And so, we're thankful to the archivists who helped us gain access and like flip through everything. And then we also were able to kind of contribute to the archive through what they call reparative description, which is a process of like correcting or updating some of the outdated language that exists in what in many ways is a colonial archive. And so our digging through this, we've seen kind of terrible images of war and brutality, but also kind of the history of how people thought about race and ethnicity in the US. And a lot of times it was written from kind of a white framework. And so moving on.
So this is the route book from 1900. This is the one. This is actually one that's at the Buffalo Bill Museum and Grave. They have a version of it, but the one on the left is actually the digital reproduction of the one that's at MCA. They look identical, don't they? But here you can see that the names have increased from 3 to 8, and I said take note of the spelling, and you can see that the names have also changed. And that why, you can always ask the question, well, why did they change? Why did Geronimo go from Momo to Inocencio? Right? Or why did Isadora, her like spelling go from I to Y? And we see this kind of movement throughout the throughout the sort of period of time that we're looking beyond 1900.
And we incorporate that into the rotation of names at the MCA. So right now, there's the We Are Coming marquee, but then there are 2 other marquees that have their names on them. And so every 2 weeks, we are rotating out their names so that each of them gets some time up on the wall. But over the course of, I think, is it 16 weeks, or over the course of the many weeks that the show is up, the spellings also change. And so we're tracking the spellings of their names through birth records, through the program, through
marriage certificates,
city directories, census records. And so we're kind of reconstructing their lives through what's left in these documentary sources. So next, okay, here we go.
So this is another iteration. So we did it in Boulder, we went up to Cody, and then most recently we actually traveled to LA to do this project. And this is the Eagle Theater that was, it was the Eagle Theater, and then it was a church, sort of just like the Holiday was once a church, once a theater, then a church, and then a theater again. And but this is a neighborhood that's particularly interesting and important to us. So LA has a very high proportion of Filipino Americans who live there. Eagle Rock in particular has one of the densest populations of Filipino Americans. So doing this project in that neighborhood had a certain a different resonance for us. So this was also our chance to expand beyond the original 3 names, and it's the first time that we started to include some of the performers who joined in 1900. So Estaquio Caliz, Filimon Hermoso, and then Lorenzo Eman. And I was going to say one other thing. Another piece that's important to us, that whether it's happening on site or happening on the museum, is actually having the rotation of the names happening at a time when people can encounter it. So you see the building, the construction, and the deconstruction of those names happening. And you know, whoever is installing those names potentially becomes another interpreter to the story. So we think of it as also wrapping in other people to this story of this history that's otherwise been quite buried. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yes, so they were a multilingual group. So they came of age in the Philippines under Spanish rule. We were also trying to think about the complexities of language and what it meant to communicate a we in English. And so the LA iteration of this project was also an opportunity for us to kind of speak, at least through the artwork or the text, and announce a sort of "we are coming" in ways that would be legible to some, but maybe not to all, and to kind of think of the politics of inclusion, exclusion, who is called in through language. So this is a different kind of marquee. It's got 3 faces. So actually on the face that you can't see, it still actually says "we are coming." But on this side, in Tagalog, it says "darating na kami," which is essentially "we are coming." And we understood that in this community, it wouldn't be illegible. It would actually be very legible. And so it was really the first time we decided to do it, and because that level of translation was important to us. One more thing about the "we."
Yeah. Okay.
So one more thing about the "we." It's expansive. It is unlike the singular eye of Buffalo Bill. The "we" has a potential to remain open, in a sense that if you encounter this "we are coming" on the marquee or the "we are coming" at MCA, it asks this question of am I included in that "we," or who could be included in that "we"? And so we like to think of it not as something that forecloses possibility, but something that kind of expands the circle and expands it in a kind of a collective sense, that our politics could be aligned and you could be folded into the "we." And so it's interesting to kind of think about that as, a sense of social bonds, or the potential for relating to one another in different ways. And any of those who have not been in the majoritarian group, the minoritarian actors in the world, could also be folded into that "we." And so it's this anticipatory logic that things could be otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So the next image.
It's a preview.
We'll just pause on it for a moment and let's
just let it settle in. Okay. This is an amazing image, and I think we got to shout out your dad.
Yes. So I guess there's a small story to tell.
Should we talk about the image and then tell the story?
Let's go for it.
So this image is from 1900. It's actually, so this doesn't exist in any archive. This we found, and you'll hear the story of the we found by other means, but it's a remarkable photograph because unlike the photograph you saw with the 8 performers in Madison Square Garden, there's a way in which that image is mediated by the 2 people who are kneeling in front. It's kind of a promo shot. Whereas this image reads in a very different way. It reads very much as if a photograph perhaps taken by this Filipino troupe for the Filipino troupe. There's a text, actually, we're not showing it on the back, but there's text on the back that seems to indicate that as well. And the other thing that's different here versus the other image, if in the other image they were wearing sort of kind of clothing, sort of kind of like a Spanish colonial, Filipino colonial clothing of the time, the sort of the white shirt, pants, and then the straw hat. Here they're wearing clothes that are associated with the Revolutionary Army. So they are wearing, and they actually have, it's hard to see, but the gentleman on the left is carrying a giant flag of the Philippines, which in the US at the time could have been considered actually an illegal act. It was an insurgent act. They're brandishing weapons. These are bolos or machetes, which would have also been a common instrument of war during the Philippine-American War. So there's a real presence in this photograph that for us is really compelling. Like we've talked about this photograph, I don't know how much.
A lot. A lot.
But it changes how we interpret the archive. This is a pivotal image.
Some other things that we can say about it, I think there's an incredible intimacy among them. They're like close together. Their hands, some of them are like on each other's knees. There's like an incredible affection amongst them. And another thing, if anyone has done the count, there are only 7 of them in the photo. And remember that this is like the Filipino 8, or there are 8 Filipino Rough Riders. And we have like talked about this for hours, and we've like tried to figure out where number 8 is and like what it could mean that there are only 7. And we are convinced that the 8th person is taking the image.
Yeah.
And like when we came across this, it like shifted the entire paradigm. It shifted our understanding of the archive. And I don't know, it's important for us to be sharing this with you because you, as this group here, are the first people really in the world to see this since, I think since the photo was taken, aside from those who've encountered it and
how it's moved maybe through hands, but have sort of understood. I think this is the first sort of like discussion of probably its significance. Yeah. So maybe you gotta do the shout out.
Yeah, and so I'll tell the story, and also about the back.
Oh yeah.
It's inscribed with this beautiful penmanship in ink on the back of the photo, and it says
Octubre 1900. So it says October in Spanish, and then it says Buffalo Bills, Wild West.
Remember
Buffalo Bills to the Buffalo Bills Wild West.
Remember the Filipino troop Buffalo Bills Wild West.
Yes, that's right.
And so it was like a memento. It was like an inscription that was meant to be shared. Like, don't forget us. Please remember us. And so the fact that this appeared, I don't know, it's just incredible. And so the story, the shout out, we had come back from the Buffalo Bill Museum and Grave in the archives, and we're saying we don't have images, like we've never seen them, or like the ones we've seen are these stage photos. And one evening, so I look back at the calendar. We went to Golden on October 1st of 2021.
Woo.
And a couple, like maybe 2 weeks later, I was with my father, who's here in the audience. Yay! And I was like, hey, can you like say these names? Can you like speak them? Because they're like, these are old school names, right? Like Estacio and Lorenzo, and I was like, can you just like speak them and say them? And so he said each of their names. I was like, wow, this is really amazing. And then he's like, I'm gonna search for them. And I'm like, you're never gonna find anything. Like, we've been online, we've been in the official archives. Those images don't exist. So I left, and I was driving home, and he called, and I didn't answer it because I was driving, but he left a voicemail. And it said, Emmanuel, I found an image of the Filipino Rough Riders. And I was like, what are you talking about?
What?
So, it had been posted on eBay. And he's like, do you want it? And I called him, and I was like, you have no idea. Yes. Yes. And so, we immediately acquired it, and like we brought it to be conserved and stabilized because, the image was already faint.
Yeah.
But
it's this big.
but we wanted it to survive. And so we've thought a lot about this. And
and so, I mean, it's like it's the serendipity of an image, and yet how much like serendipity can change something, you know, basically the history of something 180.
And we've actually talked about this a lot in our search. People have said, like, how did you find them? And we've talked about how actually they've made themselves known to us. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I'm not superstitious, but I think
I am.
His calling and like saying them, like brought them into being and made them appear somehow. So I don't know, we have no other way of explaining how this could have happened, how it could have happened.
Right.
So
because trust me, I've looked on eBay.
What's that?
I've looked on eBay.
Yeah.
I haven't found anything like this since.
Yeah. All right, so maybe we shouldn't leave time to talk.
Yeah, is there one more image?
Keep going.
Oh, right. We never actually showed this image. Yeah. This is how the name marquees. So these are on the second floor. There's 2 of them, and this is where the rotation is happening. So this is actually last week, I think.
Last week.
In the rotation. So we're putting Lorenzo Emans and Filimon Hermoso are going up on that wall. And so actually, if you go to the museum, you'll see them on one of the 2 walls.
And shout out to the museum staff as well, Gabe and Rebecca, who have been involved in the rotation process.
And we'll just leave it
stop here.
Yeah, this is also at the museum. So this is the nighttime shot of.
This is the nighttime shot that you can see enlarged at the museum.
Yeah.
All right, so we've been going for a while, so maybe we'll stop and like entertain some questions or hear your reactions or some thoughts.
Transition to the next portion.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you guys. That was really great. Wasn't that great? Can you guys give a hand? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to take some questions for you guys in just a moment. And again, I encourage you to make your question one sentence so that we have time for everybody's question. So I was thinking about, I know this doesn't sound right, but I was thinking about Star Trek when you guys were talking. Because I rewatched The Next Generation during lockdown. And on the whole first season, there's a black woman on the bridge of Star Trek who is never named and never has any lines, I don't think. I mean, she's on the bridge, you know, like with all the rest of the cast. And there's a part of me that's always like, I wonder what her story is, you know, and wanting to write it. And I think for me, when I was creating my part of the exhibit for Cowboy, it was, you know, this thing of being historically marginalized, connecting with black people from 100+ years ago. And I wonder what it means to you guys personally to be bringing forward the history of people who maybe never even thought that they would be considered a century later. Like, what does it feel like for you personally to be doing this?
I mean, I think it feels different from other kinds of projects I've done. I mean, this is the first sort of historical project as an artist I've ever done, so it's a new experience regardless. But it does feel, you know, I think Emmanuel talked about this sense of like this conjuring that seems to be happening, and we often talk about how what it feels like we're doing, that there has to be an incredible amount of sort of regard and respect, because like I said, it's I'm a little bit more of the superstitious person here, but that there's a way in which things feel like they are presented to us in ways that it's sort of shocking to think that we were able to find it. It's such a minor thread that's just so barely present, and yet it comes into such sharp focus that it can't not feel like there's some kind of connection between ourselves and a group of people who you know, we only know through their records and through like a handful of images. So it feels, I feel it's taken us a long time to sort of talk about the project, and part of it is because we've wanted to sort of do it with a lot of care and respect. I mean, that's a thing we talk about a lot.
Yeah, early on, we were interviewed for like different venues, and we didn't want to give too much too early because we weren't sure. And once something makes it out into the record, it starts to become its own its own story, or it's no longer we can't control the narrative. And so we were asked to kind of like expand on this or expand on that, and we wanted to get it right and make sure that like we were telling their stories as truthfully and honestly as we could. So I think it mattered. Like the more we found, the more we wanted to know, and so it kind of also created this challenge because people would say, "We don't have anything like that in our archive," and we would say, "That you know of, right?" And that let us look, because I think we suspect that something might be there. And so, I think it's, as you mentioned, kind of like bringing forward the stories of people whose stories haven't been told.
Yeah. I love that you talked about connection. I think there's ways that in order to be successful in America, the things that are required for that, education, exposure, being able to speak in a certain way, sometimes they can carry you away from the culture you were born with. And so I think there's something really interesting, first of all, in you guys changing the I am coming to the we, bringing by that connection, but that you guys have excelled in academia and been able to find on the other side of that connection to culture and being able to bring it forward and protect it in that way that you're talking about. I also think it's really cool that you got that photo through your father. Like that's like another point of connection, right? Because you're connecting with the culture, but then you have the like familial connection. Like it's just, it's really dope. That wasn't a question. That was just, you guys are dope. But,
Thank you. Thank you.
But do you have thoughts about how this is how this is connecting you to your history, culture, personally, family, that kind of thing? Like, what's that like for you?
Do you want me to go first? I mean, most of my work has been in the contemporary moment. And so like I've been aware of Philippine history in these kind of like broad brushstrokes, but this project in particular kind of required us to do some self-study and like learn our history and learn the history of immigration and learn the history of US-Philippine relations. And I mean, we were like tracking the kind of the unfolding of the Philippine-American War alongside the unfolding of Buffalo Bill's Wild West. And so like the front page of the newspaper would, be talking about like this battle was happening, like this is the dynamic, this is the turn in the war. And 2 columns over was the announcement of like the arrival or like the coming of the shows. And so like we were kind of like tracking these 2 things happening kind of simultaneously. So it has kind of opened my eyes to a history that is like much deeper and more complex than I had ever imagined. So
I would totally agree. I mean, I think it's also, I had the broad strokes of that history as well too. I think both Emmanuel and I knew the Philippine-American War. We knew more of it than is taught in schools, but not nearly the depth of what we've had to know and the politics that were also going on in the U.S. Around that and the narrative around that. And the thing that's interesting is like, when we've gone to archives, for example, and said, we're looking for these things, and we get people are sort of like, oh, that's nice, but you probably won't find anything. They were only in the show for 2 years. Basically, if we haven't found it, maybe it's not there. But then when you go back in the historical record and you look at the newspapers, not just the New York Times, that you can look at newspapers anywhere where Buffalo Bill's show traveled, but you are guaranteed, especially in 1899 and 1900, that there would be front page stories about the Philippine-American War, about the battles being fought, about the attempt to capture Emilio Aguinaldo, who was the revolutionary president, and all the even the war crimes. There were discussions later of the various war crimes that were committed by the Americans in the Philippines, and to see that side by side or just a page in, and then to read about the Filipino performers would also get headlined because they were so unusual. They were like evidence of this colonial other. So to have that side by side was just like, it was a little cognitive dissonance, I think,
It's really beautiful. I really, for what it's worth, I really enjoyed hearing you guys talk about it.
Thank you.
Do we have audience questions? Are there? I'm checking. There's two hands together. Okay.
I love this project, and I love and admire how careful you have been as storytellers. I'm going to ask you not to be careful. And do you have an interpretation for why Isidora is so central in more than just one photo? It's one big group photo, and there's one that you found. Do you have any thoughts on why that might be?
She's a badass.
Yeah.
Was everyone ever able to hear that question?
So we'll amplify or we'll repeat it. So why? So thank you for the question. So why do we have an interpretation of how and why Isadora seems to be so central in many of the photos? Is that correct? Yeah.
And I said she's a badass. And I say that tongue in cheek, but one of the things that we came across, for example, in our research, she's a person that we have. I wouldn't say a lot of information, but but some information during the 1899-1900 years. And in 1900, she was actually involved in a near fatal horse accident. Like her horse crashed, and it sounds like she had a concussion, and like the headlines were, Filipina gonna die. Basically, that's what they said, and it's actually in the 1900 route book. It's documented there too. So not everything is documented as an event that happens, but that was one that required some notation. So and then we see her in these images. Those images are after the accident that nearly killed her. So that she gets back on a horse.
So she is a badass.
Oh, she's a badass.
Okay,
I wasn't lying. So I that's my theory.
Yeah.
that she commands a presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something else about the archive, I think there's a demand that people record their stories, and there's a demand that we go and find them. But I think as we've worked on this, we've also entertained the possibility that maybe some people didn't want to be documented. And that this was an incredible moment where there was a hostile US public, and in some ways it could be that to remain kind of what's the word? To have some kind of fugitive existence where it's not about state surveillance, right? It's not answering the census or not answering the door to say hey, let's document who's here, kind of in this biopolitical, administrative, what's the racial composition of the population. So I think another interpretation of the lack of documentation is flying under the radar, and maybe that's by choice. But for the images, why centered? Anything else, or?
No, I just think that, my sense is that she had a presence to her. We encountered newspaper articles, and so another thing that's curious is to find when they are quoted, right? So, not everybody is quoted. The Buffalo Bill Wild West show comes through town, they're going to talk to Cody, they're going to talk to Annie Oakley, they're going to talk to whomever, but at this moment in time, they're also sometimes talking to the Filipino performers, and in a few instances, she is actually... She emerges. So there is a way in which there's a strength of character that seems to be present with her. Again, it's like a feeling as opposed to anything we can kind of point to.
And I think that's why the art does something too. I don't know. I'm an empiricist at heart when it comes to is the evidence there or not?
He says that all the time to me.
But there's something kind of speculative, and there's possibility in the speculation that it could be. Yeah. And that leaves it open for us to do things that we couldn't do otherwise because we're dealing with a shadow archive. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Okay, right next, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. This is also a feeling-based question. I'm curious what the reception was in LA because of the population, because of the knowledge. You know, I think obviously your product was received differently in Colorado with a lot of, like large community. And then I have another question. Sorry, I'm gonna talk to you, but and then what's the future of this project? I'm curious how if it's like a lifelong, you're gonna continue to look at eBay until you die.
So how is the reception in LA different than here, and what is the future of this project?
Do you want?
Do LA?
I can do LA. So LA was interesting. We did something actually kind of similar here. We did 2 films because the theater is an active theater. That's actually primarily what it does. They don't normally do these kinds of like a marquee thing that's separate from what's going on in the theater. And what was really interesting, so it's LA. There's a much bigger Philippine American population. Eagle Rock in particular has restaurants, stores. It's very visible. Yet the place where we were doing this theater, up until that time, they had just reopened in July of this year, but they hadn't really engaged with the Philippine American population. Like that hadn't been their demographic, and they have a lot of people who come to their screenings, including movie stars. I got to see a sighting of a movie star, so I'm excited for that. But when we did this project, there was a very large Philippine American community, so much so that the person who was introducing us, who was responsible for sort of like basically community engagement, looked out into the crowd, she herself being Filipino American, and was sort of taken aback by it, like in this way that was heartwarming, but also she was just like, this is new, this has never happened before. So I think that it was, there was a kind of, and there were a lot of questions like, who, what, where, when, what, huh? How did I not know this? And so it's great to be able to share we didn't know it either, but now we do, and we're telling that story.
And so for the next question, can we put the slides back up, or is that possible? Like, it's a nice segue into maybe what is happening next. I don't know if...
Yeah, I think they're up.
Okay. I'm in control here. So this is an installation shot of the MCA, and one of the things we also... So I'm getting to the question about what's next, but I just wanted to comment on this, that it folds the other artwork into the we, and I think in an interesting way. Like, it was one thing for us to work on this, like, in Yumi's studio, and then it was another to like see it in the context of the other art, where it expanded that we to kind of almost everyone whose work is in the show, challenging the cowboy Indian binary and telling different stories. So what's next? Actually, coming up, what is today? Today is the 7th, so 10 days from now?
10 days from now at the Oriental on 44th and Tennyson.
Yeah. So we're going to do a December iteration here in Denver. Do you know the time yet?
It'll probably be in the afternoon, like midday.
Midday. 3-ish. To be determined exact time.
But it'll be up for a few days.
So this is on 44th
Tennyson,
and
right?
Tennyson-ish. We'd like to thank Sarah for helping us with making this happen. What's that?
Well, no. That's Photoshop.
Well done.
So,
but wait, can I tell the interesting thing
Go for
about
it,
this?
yeah.
Okay, so when I was Photoshopping this, not really. No, when I was putting the letters up on the marquee to announce the thing coming, I was remembering, I was like, God, December, that's so interesting. And so we have a huge Excel spreadsheet that tracks all the travel dates and towns and cities that Buffalo Bill's Wild West traveled to in 1899 and 1900. And I was like, usually the show closed in October. That was like when the season ended. But I was like, in 1900 it went later because they traveled to New Orleans, they traveled to Texas. And so I looked back, and the last show was December 16th, 1900, and that would have been the last show of the Filipino performers ever together in the Wild West show. And so the fact that we're doing this 123 years and a day later, there feels like there's something poetic about that, but I ascribe meaning to everything.
So please join us, you know.
So this is an immediate. This is like, to answer your question, like we're going to keep trying to expand the theater. We're using basically the logics of the traveling show and what it means to go to communities sort of large and small. So Cody was a really interesting place to do this. There are not very many Filipinos there. And then after this, we're actually we're going to be in Maine in January, the best time of the year. And we're going to do an iteration of this project because it's also making us look at theaters differently. I don't think I was quite as aware of all these different marquees until this project. So we're going to do another iteration in this town, Dover Foxcroft, which is a teeny tiny town. And Buffalo Bill's Wild West traveled through that town in 1900 with the 8 Filipinos right past, the parade literally passed right in front of where this theater is. So we're going to keep doing that. We have other ideas in terms of like thinking about like building out the archive as other kinds of projects. I mean, it's super full. Like we have a ton of video footage that we still have to kind of deal with. I mean, so this is our distillation right now. But I mean, we'll do it for as long as it's interesting, which hopefully will be for a while. And we're writing stuff too.
Well, thank you for that question. I think here we have another one. Yes. Yeah, I'm talking to you right there.
My question was, do we know anything about these Filipinos, where they're from, do they speak Tagalog? Can we go backwards in time?
You want that? Yes, we know some stuff. We know, well, what do you want to say about it? Why don't you talk about it?
Yes, we know, we've pieced together their lives pre-Buffalo Bill show and their lives after Buffalo Bill show. So some of them we've tracked back to, like Felix, he was born in Puerto Princesa, in the Philippines. And
we found somebody's street address in
street
Cavite.
addresses in Cavite. We know from the census records, at certain moments, they would require people to disclose their mother tongue. So many of them they listed Spanish as their primary language spoken in the household. We found some documentation that lists their multiple languages. One of them said Filipino, Hawaiian, because spent some time in Hawaii. Portuguese because of Hawaii.
Yeah.
So we've been able to kind of reconstruct kind of their early lives. We've tracked some of them through their deaths. So we found their death records, we found burial records. Went to New Orleans and visited some of their addresses.
In Chicago, you saw.
And Chicago, some of them. I went to one of their, the final resting place, an unmarked grave in Chicago. It's like a pauper's grave. Grave. So it was just like grass, but through the church records, we found like the actual burial plots. So
we know also that that they, just in passing of one article, that they had a Spanish that basically they spoke sometimes through an interpreter, and the interpreter was the interpreter for all the Spanish language speakers. So that was, if they were speaking something with each other, and then when they were trying to communicate to management, they would speak Spanish, and then sometimes they would speak English. We know some of them did speak English.
Hey, so I want to ask if people want to connect with your work or follow it out in the World Wide Web, the information superhighway. They still call it that, right?
Superhighway.
Where can they connect? Where can people find more information? Obviously, everyone's going to be at this show.
Check it out.
On December 17th.
That's right.
Yes, and but where else?
I don't know.
Instagram.
I have no idea where you can find this work.
Email, so just Google us at University of Colorado. And we also, the reason we showed that photo is because we also have some forthcoming writing that will be making its way out into the world. So early next year, look for an article.
A really scholarly article.
Really
with
scholarly
footnotes.
article, 10,000 words, explaining all of this, but in Journal of Asian American Studies. And so it's we have developed kind of this project in written form there, but go see the work, see their names, and hopefully you find meaning.
Say their names.
Say their names too, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, there's magic in saying their names because that's what produced the photo. Make sure we all go to the exhibit. We are going to have to wrap up, but we will be around for a little bit more. So can you please give everyone a hand, please? Thank you. It's been a really
Thank you, everyone.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming.